Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the latest in my ongoing series of Monster High redesigns, and today I will be redesigning Clawd. Starting off, I have my little mood board here. I have Clawdeen first and foremost, since he is her brother, and I wanted to base the same sort of anatomy off of what I had designed previously to keep it consistent. And for aesthetics, I wanted to go more along the lines of very just heavy, traditional werewolf aesthetics, because I feel like Clawd, in all of his iterations, is very just sort of like a generic boy, generic jock, which is perfectly fine for a character to be. I feel like it fits his personality, but it wasn't something that was particularly inspiring to me. So I wanted to incorporate that jock aesthetic along with a bit of more gothic aesthetics of like black and like some angular shapes. Just have the goth be a little bit more subtle to the jock, but still have it be there to symbolize the outsiderness of the werewolf. And so I also brought in a lot of sort of like lumberjack aesthetics and like flannels. So I wanted to just sort of go with that. So I sketched out his body here. I'm going to do 5 different little mini designs. The first one I just did Letterman with a plaid shirt underneath, some ripped jeans, and some boots. Second one I sort of did another sort of Letterman jacket, but this time a lot more sort of ripped and torn with a very angular and ripped up dramatic collar there to have it sort of look a little bit more werewolfy. For the third design, I wanted to experiment with a little bit of mesh underneath a jersey here, and also experiment with a little bit more facial hair, since he is a werewolf after all. For my fourth design, I was a little bit stuck here looking back at my mood board, because this aesthetic wasn't really one that was very inspiring to me, and I feel like Clawd as a character wouldn't really be one to push the limits of fashion, per se. So it was definitely a bit of a struggle to sort of hold myself back and not really fall into any sort of alternative genre or any sort of vintage aesthetics either, and try to just keep it very modern and straightforward and jockish. So the third design there is also just a flannel jersey, ripped pants, and I'd done ripped jeans for pretty much all these iterations. So for the fifth one, I decided to try, okay, what if he had like some athletic shorts? I wasn't really a huge fan of how it looked, because I feel like ripped jeans are very just like traditional werewolf look, and that's really what I was going to aim for in this design. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm just going through out of all these designs and listing out which part is my favorite, like which one had my favorite hair, my favorite top, my favorite pants, etc. So that way I can then combine all of those little design elements that I came up with, pick and choose on my favorite bits, so that way the final design is better than what I would have just come off on my first try or my third try alone. So I definitely wanted to keep that really sharp and angular, dramatic sort of collar piece there, because I feel like that was sort of the one thing that is very like edgy. I also wanted to have a jersey underneath with a little silver bullet, or gold bullet, because he can't wear silver because he's a werewolf necklace. Here I'm just writing out some notes. I wanted him to have a plaid shirt tied around his waist, so he can have both the jersey and the plaid going into the design, and the plaid shirt around the waist will also add more to his silhouette. Here I'm just sort of sketching out some facial ideas, definitely working off of Clawdeen's face structure, and here I was just trying to base out, since I don't imagine Clawd to be the type of person to have makeup on, I was trying to base out his hair and his facial hair a little bit too. As for his hair, I feel like Clawd is voted #1 character most likely to have a fade. I was also wanting him to have some little fingerless gloves, because I thought that would help tie in a little bit more edge to everything. And I didn't do any sort of color palette work on this one, because I just imagined it pretty much just black and white with a little bit of red on the plaid. So here I'm just beginning to color. I use the same skin tone as Clawdeen as my sort of base, and of course throughout the course of editing and doing all my highlights, my shading, it changes a little bit, but so that's why I wasn't too concerned of just straight up color picking, because I knew that after doing all the rendering it would look slightly different anyways, especially because I wanted to do a lot of red highlights to bring in the little pops of red throughout his design. So as you can see here, I wanted him to have not smooth skin, but fur all over his body, the same way as Clawdeen's. Whenever there's a little bit of skin poking through, I made sure to have it be sort of rough line to indicate fur. And of course, I went with the same golden eyes as Clawdeen, and I brought the wolf nose. And for his hair, I decided to do a black color, because I imagine Clawdeen's natural color is brown, but she's the type of person to dye it a lot. So with Clawd, I wanted him to have very natural hair color to tie into that sort of woodsy werewolf aesthetic. So for his jacket here, I'm doing black, and if you'll notice at the sleeves, there are 7 moons, and I chose 7 specifically because that's an important number in werewolf lore. Again, tying it back to everything. For the 13 here, I did a very classic Monster High fuchsia and blending it in with the cream and the black to sort of make everything very cohesive here. and tying it in together with a bit on the jacket too. And I also, on the white, instead of it being pure white, I decided to do more of a sort of cream color to tie in with the warm red of the plaid around his waist, and keeping his color palette in the warm range. Even on the blue chains here, I wanted to keep them more sort of grayish color, and I even pushed the blue more towards the green range to keep his color palette very warm and earthy. I am also using that same cream color from the jacket on the rips in his pants, just to keep the color palette very consistent and, you know, flowing throughout. For his boots, I wanted them to be that sort of tan work boot color, and I also reworked that brown up into his fingerless gloves and onto the leather strap of his necklace as well. And having some red paw prints just going to tie together the red of the flannel. It was very fun experimenting with a color palette that was much more neutral and straightforward, because all my other Monster High redesigns have been very neon, because that's my comfort zone, that's what I like doing best. It was nice having a color palette that was very straightforward and have to put a lot of brain power into trying to think of how to mix together all these clashing colors that are very bright and saturated. This one was very like, it's jeans, black shirt, black jacket, good to go. So onto the shading here, just doing my rendering of everything. The design process took about half an hour, and the coloring only took about 2 hours and 15 minutes, so this was definitely a pretty quick piece overall. I'm not sure exactly how it compares to my times in the rest of them, but if you watch the rest of the videos, I'm sure you can find out. Here I'm just rendering out that fur more. I definitely wanted to match the rendering on Clawdine's tail, and just have it be sort of consistent. I really like doing highlights in a piece when it comes to rendering. It's one of my favorite things, just because I feel like it's finally when you get to make the pieces pop. Hair is also one of my favorite things to draw, so having a big fluffy tail is really just an excuse for me to render some hair, even if I didn't spend a lot of time on it overall. His boots, in particular, is one thing I can talk about, because they gave me some trouble trying to figure out how exactly to do them, because he has that sort of paw shape that makes it look like when you put him in shoes that it looks like he's wearing high heels, but I didn't want him to be wearing high heels because he's very athletic. I don't think that would be the thing he'd wear. So I was trying to figure out how to make it look more sort of natural on his foot, and I was thinking of like, what's trendy, what do like jocks wear, and I feel like big bulbous pieces of like plastic on the heel are very in right now, or at least they were when I was in college. I remember seeing them around a lot, so I decided to put some of that sculpted in detail onto his shoes, and I wanted the texture on the bottom. This doesn't really come across in the piece, but I was imagining it, that the texture would have that sort of like rough, like wolf, like paw texture to it on the bottom. So here on the plaid, just doing the typical red and black plaid with a little bit of the orange from the leather and the boots mixed in with it, subtly. And I also have a mesh shirt underneath his jersey to incorporate that little touch of mesh idea that I was having in my design process, and also have the same sort of visual look of a collar to tie back into dogs and werewolves. My favorite part of redesigning is finding ways to really push the monster aspect of a redesign. So, you know, there's paws, there's moons throughout his design, but I didn't really want to go as hard on his design. I feel like I definitely want to still read very traditional werewolf, so I resorted to a lot of those classic tropes of ripped jeans, red flannel, but I also wanted it to be just sort of a little bit more plain, because I feel like he's more the type of person to let his actions speak louder than his fashion. And here's when I realized I put a black shirt under a black jacket, so I decided to try to do a little bit of jersey texture to help break that up a little bit more visually, so they don't look so congealed and so heavy on his front there. So just putting the last final details on everything in my rendering here before I move on to the background, which as always for my backgrounds I just use a photograph that I've taken. Here I just use a picture of the woods, because Clawdine used a picture of the woods also, and I wanted them to match. And so I'm just editing the ground there to be a bit more red, the trees to be a bit more warm, just to again help with his color palette, so the background enhances and doesn't sort of like drown him out. And for my final touches here, I'm adding my little bit of star sparkle that I really love adding to these pieces. I just think it really brightens them up. It's a lot of fun. So just putting the last little bit of blur behind him, and here's the final redesign. Overall, I'm definitely a lot more happy with his redesign than I really thought I would be initially going into this, especially because I was really so lost on inspiration of what to do for this design, since Jock is just so out of my wheelhouse, but I definitely feel like it reads Werewolf Jock, with just a pinch of goth. And now for the comparison between generations, he didn't have a Gen 2, so I just put in his cartoon design, which is really the design they use for most of it. I definitely feel like my Clawd redesign definitely reads the most werewolf out of these designs, but I like the ingenuity of Generation 1 compared to the other three, but I feel like Clawd Wolf, when you think of him, you just have the varsity jacket and jeans come into your mind, so I definitely wanted to stick to that imagery. And just for fun, I decided to put a little compilation of all the little redesigns that I've done together, so I can put all of my height headcanons together. And I really like how Clawd fits into this dynamic. I think I like him more as part of the pack than I like his design just standing on its own. Which is great for a doll redesign, because then you want to buy him to add to your collection. Here's his final design again. Be sure to subscribe, because next up is Toralei, which I'm really excited for because she's one of my favorite characters. Here are my socials, so be sure to follow for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!